in weeks ahead. Bob Bixby of the Concord Coalition, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
And on now to the Capitol. The Senate returning today from a 2-week break. They'll start with general speeches and legislative business at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. They'll be taking up 2014 Defense Authorization Bill, and at 5 o'clock, a U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals nomination for the D.C. Circuit.
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal Father, we thank you for the life and legacy of the man called Madiba, Nelson Mandela, and for the exemplary footprints he left in the sands of time. Inspired by his great life, may our lawmakers deal fairly and wisely with the great issues of our time. Lord, help our senators to remain tethered to a firm faith in you, committing their lives and our country to your will. May they demonstrate their faith daily, remembering that faith without action is not real. Empower them to work together for the peace and prosperity of America as they seek spiritual moorings in today's turbulent times. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., December 9, 2013. To the Senate. Under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Christopher Murphy, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I now move to proceed to calendar number 243.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to the consideration of calendar number 243 S 1356, a bill to amend the Workforce Investment Act of 1998 and so forth and for other purposes.
Mr. President, following my remarks and those of the Republican leader, the Senate will be in morning business till 4 o'clock this afternoon. At 4 o'clock, the Senate will resume consideration of the National Defense Authorization Act. At 5 p.m., the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the nomination of Patricia Millett to be a United States Circuit Judge for the D.C. Circuit post-cloture. At 5:30, then, the Senate will vote on confirmation of the Millett nomination. Mr. President, I think there are 4 bills, and the clerk can help both of us, at the desk due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bills for the second time.
S 1774, a bill to reauthorize the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988 for 1 year. S 1775, a bill to improve the sexual assault prevention and response programs and activities of the Department of Defense and for other purposes. H.R. 1965, an act to streamline and ensure onshore energy permitting, provide for onshore leasing certainty, and provide certainty to oil shale development, and so forth and for other purposes. H.R. 2728, an act to recognize states' authority to regulate oil and gas operations and promote American energy security, development, and job creation.
Mr. President, I would object to any further proceedings with respect to these two bills en bloc.
Objections having been heard, the bills will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, welcome back. I hope that you and staff and all the other senators had a wonderful Thanksgiving. It was a very good Thanksgiving for us. We had all of our children and all of our grandchildren except one. She had to work. She lives in New York now. Mr. President, this week the United States begins a short 2-week work period, and I hope it's only 2 weeks. But it could bleed over until over the weekend before Christmas. Now, I know that I come to this floor and say a lot of times we're going to have to work weekend. But, Mr. President, we may really have to work the next couple of weekends. We've had a wonderful 2-week break. It was important for all of us. But before I discuss the business before this body, I mourn like we all mourn. But I also celebrate the life of South Africa's great emancipator, Nelson Mandela. He once said, quote, "Difficulties break some men, but make others," close quote. His dedication to peace and justice was forged really in the fire of adversity. 27 years in prison, among other things. But while he endured great hardship for the cause of universal suffrage, his capacity for forgiveness was just really boundless, as his dedication to democracy, freedom, and equality was. He leaves a legacy that is going to be so significant. It will inspire current and future leaders for generations to come. Mr. President, now with our schedule. This week, as South Africa mourns the founder of its democracy, the Senate must continue its work in our democracy. I suggest to my colleagues that before the Senate will the Senate, as I've indicated, work long nights. I think we're going to come in earlier than we normally do, and possibly weekends to complete this workload that we have before the holidays. During this next work period, the one we're now engaged in, we must complete work on the National Defense Authorization Act. It's my understanding that the two bodies, the two committees have come up with something. I hope that we get a message from the House on this soon, and I hope we can dispose of this very quickly. We must address the issue of additional sanctions against Iran. We must pass an agriculture jobs conference report. We must ensure seniors on Medicare can keep their doctors by adjusting physician payments. We must consider a large number of nominations, and we must complete a budget agreement that protects our economy and ensures our government can continue the work of the people. I'm not going to talk about each of these things individually, other than I think it is so short-sighted what the Republicans are doing regarding the famous SGR, or physician payments for Medicare. There's money to take care of this, Mr. President, a number of different sources, not the least of which is the overseas contingency funds. We had money set aside for the wars in Iran and Afghanistan. They are being phased out. There's still almost $1 trillion left. I cannot understand why the Republicans refuse to use that money. No one except the Republicans oppose closing these loopholes, and not Republicans around the country, these tax loopholes. It's only Republicans in Congress that oppose them, not Republicans around the country. These loopholes are so big you could drive the biggest vehicle in the world through them, Mr. President. But we're where we are. Despite the costly Republican shutdown this fall, last week's jobs report proved that the American economy continues to gain steam. Private sector businesses have added more than 8 million jobs over the last 45 consecutive months. If Republicans had to insist on short-sighted, draconian cuts that force layoffs of tens of thousands of teachers, firefighters, and police officers, the economy would be growing even faster than it is today. And, Mr. President, the presiding officer knows, we all know, that we need an infrastructure program. For every $1 billion we spend as a government on infrastructure, roads, bridges, dams, highways, water systems, sewer systems, we create almost 50,000 high-paying jobs. Despite last week's good economic news, Congress can and must do even more to create jobs for millions of Americans who are still looking for work. Unemployment compensation. Mr. President, we need these extended benefits. There's 1.5 million people in America who have been out of work for more than 26 weeks. We must replace Meat Act's cuts, as happened with the sequestration, with smart savings, reducing the deficit by closing wasteful tax loopholes, and making job-creating investments that spur economic growth. As we close out this year, I hope Republicans and Democrats can put aside our differences and work together to produce results for the middle class. Mr. President, the presiding officer served in the House. I've served in the House. I'm fortunate to serve here in the Senate. Mr. President, when I first came to this body, Democrats had their focus on what they thought the foundation of democracy was. Republicans did the same. They thought they knew the right thing to do. But you know, Mr. President, we could never get what we wanted. Each side couldn't get what they thought was the way it should be. So what did we do? We worked together and came up with compromises to move the legislation forward. Let's get back to where we were. That's what this body needs. So I hope we can put aside our differences and work together like we used to. It's also time for Republicans to work with us instead of against us to make the landmark health reform bill more workable. I remind my Republican colleagues that the Affordable Care Act is the law, and it has been the law of the land for 4 years, and it was upheld by the Supreme Court. As Democrats have predicted for months, enrollment in the Affordable Care Act exchanges is picking up speed as we approach the new year. As Americans learn more about the benefits of this law, more and more of them are logging on to shop for affordable, quality insurance through the state and national exchanges. The rollout of the National Affordable Care Act was rocky, to say the least, when it came out. Congress had to make crucial improvements to other landmark programs, such as Social Security and Medicare, when they were first enacted as well. These big legislative deals can have some wrinkles in them. Doesn't mean that Social Security is bad. It doesn't mean that Medicare is bad. It means they're hard to get started. And it's just the same as Obamacare. But now, I repeat, Mr. President, many of the major problems with the health care law have been fixed. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are logging on every day to research plans that they think could work for them and sign up for insurance that they know they need. States that embrace the Affordable Care Act, such as Kentucky and Washington, have also reported successes with their exchanges. And thanks to the health care law, in a few short weeks, no one can ever again be denied of insurance just because they have a pre-existing condition, because they're a cancer survivor, because they live with diabetes, or because they had acne growing up, or they're a woman. Because of this landmark law, insurance companies can no longer cancel your policy when you get sick, charge you more, I repeat, because you're a woman, or set an arbitrary limit on care that you receive. Millions of seniors have saved billions of dollars on medicine because of the Affordable Care Act. Why? Because it closed the gap in prescription drug coverage, the so-called donut hole. Millions of young people have stayed on their parents' health plans, and 17 million Americans will qualify for tax credits to purchase the coverage they need and the coverage they deserve. There are still problems with the Affordable Care Act, and we can make it better if we work together. But we can't improve the law without help from some reasonable Republicans. It's time for my Republican colleagues to give up their fantasy of repealing the law that's already benefiting tens of millions of Americans. Start working with us to make the Affordable Care Act succeed instead. Would the Chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 4:00 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
And the Senate in a quorum call today. They're back today from a 2-week break. They'll start legislative business at 4 p.m. Eastern. They'll be working on the 2014 Defense Authorization Act. Harry Reid on the floor just a little bit earlier, Majority Leader said they may be working beyond the scheduled session, working into the weekend before Christmas if they don't finish business for the year. Some of that business includes the Workforce Investment Act, some job training and partnerships with employers and colleges for unemployed workers, and then, of course, the guns, the ban on plastic guns, which they hope to get done before the end of the year, and sexual assault and the Defense Department changing the way that the Defense Department handles sexual assaults. And we could see a couple of bills on energy permits, on offshore drilling, and oil and gas development. And over in the House for this last week that they're going to be in for the year, they'll work on the one suspension bill today. Later this week in the House, they could consider legislation to create a budget for the next fiscal year. That House and Senate budget conference still in negotiations. And again, in a quorum call here on the floor of the Senate, waiting for a senator to take the floor. Back today from a 2-week break, and they'll be in scheduled for the next 2 weeks, although Majority Leader Harry Reid says that could be a little bit longer. Legislative business set to begin in about an hour and 40 minutes, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. They'll be working on the 2014 Defense Authorization Act. And later today, voting on a nomination to that controversial U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. It's going to be the first nomination that they'll take up since the Senate changed its filibuster rules. That was just before Thanksgiving break. Let's take a look back now at that debate after the vote for the filibuster. And this happened just before their Thanksgiving break.
First, to congratulate our leader, Senator Reid, for leading the Senate finally into the 21st century. That's the step that we've taken today. Thank you very much, Leader Reid, for your courageous action in making sure that the Senate can now work and get our work done. I've waited 18 years for this moment. In 1995, when we were in the minority, I proposed changing the rules on filibuster. I've been proposing it ever since. What's really happened is that this war has escalated, this war on both sides. I said at the time in 1995 that it was like an arms race, that if we didn't do something about it, the Senate would reach a point where we wouldn't be able to function. Well, I thought, perhaps at that time, I thought my words were a little apocalyptic, but as it turned out, they weren't at all. And so, this is a bright day for the United States Senate and for our country to finally be able to move ahead on nominations so that any president, not just this president, any president can put together his executive branch under our Constitution. A president should have the people that he or she wants to form their executive branch. Every senator here gets to pick his or her own staff. We don't have to have the House vote on it or anybody else. It's true of every member of the House or Senate. It's true of the judiciary, the third branch of government. They can hire their clerks or their staff without coming to us. And so now I think it's appropriate that any president can now form their executive branch with only 51 votes needed in the United States Senate, not a supermajority. So that is a huge step in the right direction. And now we can confirm judges of all the courts less than the Supreme Court, circuits and district court judges, again, with 51 votes, without this supermajority that's been filibustering for so long. Now, I listened to the Republican leader during the run-up to these votes, and he said that we were somehow going to break the rules. Break the rules to make a new rule. Well, we did not break the rules. With the vote that we just had, the Senate broke no rules. The rules provide for a 51-vote, non-debatable motion to overturn the ruling of the chair. We've done it many times in the past. Many times in the past. So we did not break the rules, simply used the rules to make sure that the Senate could function and that we can get our nominees through. I like what the writer Gail Collins said in her column this morning in the New York Times about these rules changes. She's had a lot of good things there, but she talked about how we were calling it the nuclear option. And she proffered that, probably called that because some think changing the rules here is worse than nuclear war. But it's not. It's not. It's time that we change these rules. And the Republican leader earlier said it was the Democrats who started this. The Democrats started this. It reminds me of a schoolyard fight between a couple of adolescents. And the teacher's trying to break it up. And this kid says, no, he hit me first. No, the other one says, no, he hit me first. No, he stepped on my toe first. No, he got in my road first. Who cares who started it? It's time to stop it. Even if I accept the fact that Democrats started it, maybe they can prove that we did. Possible, way back when. Well, it's escalated. It turned from a punch here and a punch there to almost extreme fighting. It got to the point where we can't function. Just on nominations alone, we've had 168 nominations since 1949. I kind of picked that date because that's when all this filibuster stuff kind of really started. 168. 82 of those have been under this president. 82. So that's why I mean, it's not worth it to talk about who started this. Fine. If they want to say the Democrats started, I'll say fine, we started it. But it's escalated and gone beyond all bounds. As I said, in 1995, it's turned into an arms race. So it's time to stop it. And that's what we did this morning with this vote. We took a step in the right direction. In 2008, Norman Ornstein, who is a congressional scholar, wrote about the broken Senate, our broken Senate, how we couldn't function. But you can go back even beyond that. In 1985, my first year here, Senator Thomas Eagleton, my neighbor to the south, said that the Senate is now in a state of incipient anarchy. I think we had something like 20 or 30 filibusters in the Congress before that. So this has been escalating over a long period of time. And it was time to stop it. And that's what we did this morning. So I say this is a big step in the right direction. But now we need to take it another step further, and that is to change filibuster on legislation. We need to change it as it pertains to legislation. Now, for example, we just had the spectacle of a bill that I reported out of our committee, unanimous, Republicans and Democrats, passed the floor of the House unanimously, comes to the Senate. One senator held it up for 10 days, stopped everything for 10 days. And guess what? It finally passed by unanimous consent. Should one senator be able to stop things around here like that? So it's time to move ahead, to get rid of the legislature, at the same time to protect the right of the minority, to offer amendments that are relevant and germane, to debate them, and to have a vote on them. Not that they should win it, but the minority should be able to offer, debate, and have a vote on relevant and germane amendments to legislation.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. 75 years ago, President Roosevelt signed the Fair Labor Standards Act, written in part by Senator Hugo Black of Alabama, who actually sat at this desk as he was writing the minimum wage law and some of the Fair Labor Standards Act legislation in the 1930s. This legislation ensured that American workers would receive a minimum wage and work reasonable hours. We know what that's done for families in this country. We also know that the minimum wage hasn't even been close to keeping up with the cost of living, with inflation. We also know a number of other things, Mr. President, about the minimum wage. Minimum wage is now $7.25 an hour. Many of minimum wage workers making $7.25 or $8 or $9 an hour, less than we want to raise the minimum wage to, so all would get a raise. We know that many of those workers work in the fast food industry. The CEO of a fast food corporation makes, we figure, about $8.7 million a year, while his average employees make something about around $19,000 a year. And I'm not one of those that says, well, that's they have to work 1 million hours to get to the $8 million a year. But just to put in perspective what's happened with wages, as wages for CEOs and for top management have gone up and up and up, and we've seen productivity of workers go up and up and up, we know that wages for those workers have simply not kept up, not just minimum wage workers, but workers overall. So since the 1970s, and especially since 2000, profits have gone up, productivity has gone up, executive salaries have gone up dramatically, yet workers' wages have been stagnant. No better example of that, Mr. President, than the minimum wage. The minimum wage was raised my first year in the Senate, my first speech on the Senate floor, with Senator Barack Obama sitting in the presiding officer's chair, with Senator Kennedy and Senator Byrd on the floor that day. Was talking about and debating increasing the minimum wage. We did that in a bipartisan way in 2007. The bill was signed by President Bush. That's the good news. The bad news is there was no cost of living adjustment. There was no escalation so that the wage would keep up with inflation, and there's not been a minimum wage increase since then. We also know another thing, Mr. President, about the minimum wage. That is, for tipped workers, those who work in diners, those who work pushing, in many cases, pushing wheelchairs at airports. They don't work for the airlines. They work for a contracting company that pays sub-minimum wage. They work for places, they're valets, they're sometimes custodians, there's people who are in positions in hotels where they might get tipped, but their minimum wage is only $2.13 an hour. So a woman that's working the floors in a diner, a man that's pushing a wheelchair or driving a cart in an airport, their minimum wage is only $2.13 an hour. Some are paid more than that, but some of them are paid as little as $2 or $3, $4 an hour, supposedly expecting that tips will make up the difference and get them to minimum wage or above. One of the things that the legislation that the Assistant Majority Leader, who's joined me on the floor, has been working on with Senator Harkin and several others of us is the new minimum wage increase. We want to increase minimum wage to $10.10 an hour, 90 cents at the President's signature, then another 90 cents, then another 90 cents. We also want to increase the tipped wage, not increase for 22 years, the tipped minimum wage to lock it in at 70% of the real minimum wage. So as the real minimum wage increases by the year 2016 under our legislation, and the worker's minimum wage would then be $10.10 an hour, sub-minimum wage, a tipped employee in an airport or in a restaurant will then be making $7 and a few cents an hour. That's the reason that in both of those wages, both the tip minimum wage and the minimum wage, will have a cost of living adjustment. So we don't have to, every 5 or 6 years, come back, have a big political fight here, raise the minimum wage. It shouldn't be a big political fight because clearly people in this country, overwhelmingly, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans think the minimum wage should be increased. It not just, Mr. President, will not just be the tipped employee or the minimum wage worker at a fast food restaurant who gets a raise that's now at $7.50 or $8 an hour, even $9 an hour. As the minimum wage goes up, so will wages for a bunch of low-income, slightly above minimum wage workers go up. So in a fast food restaurant where perhaps the night manager may make a couple dollars more an hour than the line workers who are at the counter, although the night manager does plenty of that too. The night manager might make a couple dollars above, $3 above minimum wage. We raise the minimum wage. Raising everybody's wages, the night manager's wage will increase too. The opponents to the minimum wage, and it amazes me that people can sit in this institution with good salaries that we make as members of the Senate and members of the House in both parties, with good benefits, good health insurance, decent pensions paid for by taxpayers, and oppose the minimum wage. It equally amazes me that they can oppose extending unemployment benefits. In my state alone, and I know in the presiding officer's state of Illinois it's a higher number, in the majority leader, assistant majority leader of the presiding officer's state, it's a significant number of people, over 120,000 in my state alone. Their Christmas present will be that unemployment benefits have stopped for them, have been eliminated, unless Congress acts. That's why it's so important not just to enact a minimum wage in the weeks ahead, but that we extend unemployment benefits for those workers who are looking for jobs. These aren't people that are just don't want to work. These are people that are looking for jobs out. They have to look for jobs in order to qualify, It's not a lot of money. It's 40 or 50% typically of their wage, what they were used to making. There aren't enough jobs in this country. There aren't enough jobs in Connecticut, in Illinois, in Ohio, that they can find jobs. And to take that minimum, to take that unemployment benefits away, when, number one, think of what it means to that family, and number two, as the System Majority Leader knows, this helps our economy. When people are receiving unemployment benefits, they're spending it. They're spending it in Toledo at the grocery store. They're spending it in Cleveland at the hardware store. They're spending it in Dayton at the auto repair shop to fix their car so they can go out and get a job and go out and go to work. So all of those are reasons that raising the minimum wage is so important. Extending unemployment insurance is so important. And one more point before yielding to the System Majority Leader from Illinois. These unemployment is called, it's not welfare, it's unemployment insurance. People pay in when they're working, hoping they're going to pay in for a long time because they're not going to lose their jobs. But if they lose their jobs, they collect their insurance, basically. They've paid in. That's what insurance is. Things aren't working right, you get unemployment benefits, unemployment insurance, social insurance. That's why this is so important. I yield to the Senator from Illinois.
Senator from Ohio, yield through the chair for a question.
Senator from Illinois.
I'd like to ask the Senator from Ohio if he can recall, it was not that long ago that the issues that we are discussing were largely bipartisan issues. When it came to raising the minimum wage, periodically, Senator Ted Kennedy used to sit back at that desk, and he would lead the effort, and it would turn out to be a bipartisan vote to increase the minimum wage. That, over the years, reflected a bipartisan consensus that if you're working for a living in America, you ought to be able to get by. At least, have a little bit put away for your future. But we're finding more and more that people who are working for a minimum wage cannot get by. I listened to public radio over the break. There was a lady on there who works, I believe it was in the hospitality industry, and she was explaining that she was on food stamps. And she said she had a small family and made $7.25 an hour. And with her children, she still qualified for the SNAP program, the food stamp program. Well, I did a quick calculation in my mind. I think this is correct. She was making somewhere in the range of $14,000 to $15,000 a year at $7.25 an hour, a minimum wage in many parts of the United States. She still qualified for a helping hand to feed her children. This is not a lazy person. This is a person who gets up and goes to work. My guess is it's not an easy job. She's making $7.25, but still needs a helping hand. I find it interesting now that issues that used to be bipartisan to help people just like her, working people, have now become too partisan. We should have a bipartisan consensus that regularly we increase the minimum wage in America to keep up the cost of living. And I hope we all agree that if you have a working mom who is doing her best and needs a helping hand to feed her children, food stamps should be available to her. Of the 47 million Americans receiving food stamps, 22 million of the 47 are children, 1 million veterans, 9 million elderly and disabled. 3/4 of the recipients of food stamps fall into that category: children, veterans, elderly, and disabled. And yet we are up against a battle on the Farm Bill about whether we're going to make deep cuts in food stamps. Now, it seems to me that this is counterproductive. We should be helping working families get by, those who struggle paycheck to paycheck, to at least feed their children. Going back to the point that's been made by the Senator from Ohio, when you look across the board at the vulnerability of working families, it's wages, it's that food on the table, and many times turns out to be health insurance. The number one reason for bankruptcy in America today is people's failure to be able to pay their medical bills. And what we're trying to do with the Affordable Care Act is to say to everyone in my state, 1.8 million uninsured people in Illinois, we're going to give you a chance maybe for the first time in your life to have health insurance so you won't go broke when you get sick. That, to me, when we start putting it together, it's the paycheck, it's the food, it's the health care, it's the housing. In a country like ours that wants to build the next middle class, these, to me, are the bedrocks of what you need to provide to working families. And it seems we've fallen far away from that goal of trying to provide for working families. And it's become just way too partisan. I was on a talk show with the senator, your senator from Ohio that you share the state with, and he argued the classic argument against raising the minimum wage. It's a job killer, he says. You raise the wage 50 cents an hour, $1 an hour, whatever it is, there'll be fewer jobs. Well, it turns out that history and the economic analysis prove him wrong. That's the argument that's been made against increasing the minimum wage since Franklin Roosevelt first increased it back in the 1930s. So I'd ask the senator from Ohio, when you take a look at the vulnerability of working families in America and those who've lost their job trying to find another, when you look at that, the basics that we're talking about, I think give them a fighting chance to survive, to raise their families, maybe to send their kids to school for a better education and a better future. Failing to do that does just the opposite. I'd ask the senator from Ohio if he would include in this the Affordable Care Act.
I think that's right. First of all, the points that the system majority leader was making about the bipartisanship is exactly right. And what's most not discouraging, but perhaps the most disappointing part of this is even as recently as 2007. I mean, President Bush signed this bill. We passed it. It was my first month or two in the Senate when we passed it. It was a big bipartisan vote in the House. It was a big bipartisan. I remember exactly the numbers in the Senate. Lots of Republicans joined. I believe almost every Democrat or maybe every Democrat. But again, it was gladly signed by the Republican President of the United States. And you can trace from the time of the minimum wage, when Hugo Black sat at this desk and helped to write the minimum wage and President Roosevelt signed the bill, for all these decades, the minimum wage in fits and starts, but it's kept up with inflation most of the time until the 1980s. It's been signed on by people in both parties. The same with the extension of unemployment benefits that we discussed. That it's this extension of unemployment benefits. Again, social insurance. You pay in when you don't need it, and when you need it, you can take money out of the social insurance fund and get unemployment benefits if you can't find a job. And you know, these are really tough times. Some of my colleagues, I don't think, understand sometimes how tough a time it is for so many families. There's the President of the United States, the last president from Illinois before this one, Abraham Lincoln, used to talk about getting out of the White House and going out and getting his public opinion bath, that he needed to hear from the public. And I think when I know Senator Durbin does that throughout his state of Illinois, I know that Senator Murphy in the presiding officer's chair does the same. You go out and you listen to people, and you're talking to somebody making $8 or9 an hour, and this minimum wage will increase their pay. That probably doesn't have insurance because they can't afford it. That's probably eligible for the SNAP program because of their low income. And it's the least we can do. These are people that work as hard as we do. We have jobs where we get a lot out of it. We're well paid. We have good benefits. We also have wonderful opportunities to serve the public. So many people in these jobs are barely making it. The jobs are on their feet all day. The woman in the diner making $3 or $4 an hour, hoping that people tip her to get up to $7 or $8 or $9 an hour. She's working hard. She's working every bit as hard as my colleagues and I work, yet she has so little to show for it. This is an opportunity for us as people that care about this country and care about people who live in this country, the people that are doing such of the hard work, cleaning hotel rooms, cleaning our schools, making sure our schools are clean and the trash is taken out, teaching our kids, people serving our food, people in these kinds of jobs so often, home care workers that are barely making it. The least we can do is make sure the minimum wage gets them somewhat close to a decent lifestyle and standard of living, that we do better when they're laid off with unemployment insurance, and that they get a chance with the Affordable Care Act so they can buy affordable health insurance because they'll get some help, and they can draw food stamps if they're eligible, if they need them on these low wages. And there's just no reason we can't, in the Christmas spirit, if you will, do those things that have been done bipartisanly through Senator Durbin's lifetime and my lifetimes, where both parties would step up and do these things.
The Senator would yield through the chair for one last point. He raised something that brought to my mind a recent story that I read about the new Pope, Pope Francis. What an extraordinary man. As a Catholic, I am just amazed at this man, his humility and his popularity with Catholics and non-Catholics alike, those of different faith and those with no faith. And They say that of an evening he will take off his papal garb and put a simple suit on and go out into the streets of Rome with a friend and just meet with poor people and talk to them. I can't even envision in my mind what that must be like, but it sure tells me a lot about him, and I think a reminder to all of us of two things. When he gives a message to the world about income inequality, this is not a political message for the United States or one country. It is a more basic message about the values in life, whatever your religious belief or whether you have a religious belief. And when he goes out, takes off the papal garb, and goes out as an ordinary person, I hope it's a reminder to all of us that we need to keep in touch with the very people we represent, some of whom are not wealthy enough to have a lobbyist or be politically articulate during a campaign, but deserve our representation just as much.
And that Pope Francis, thank you for that, Senator Durbin. Pope Francis, as he integrates these kinds of things into his day, into his life, he exhorted his parish priests, similar to Lincoln saying, "I need my public opinion bath." Pope Francis I exhorted his parish priests to smell like the flock and to, get among people and talk to them and learn from them and smell like the flock, be one of them. And I'm not Catholic. I know my friend from Illinois is Roman Catholic, but to see that this Pope has really brought us to a different level and called on our better angels, if you will. And I would, before yielding to Senator Durbin for his remarks, I have one more point to make about the minimum wage. The belief among many is the minimum wage is a bunch of teenagers. It's only a bunch of teenagers who get the minimum wage, and that's simply not true. Most minimum wage earners in this country are not teenagers. Most of them are supporting themselves and in many cases supporting a spouse or a family or someone in their family that's disabled or a close friend. And that's the other reason. This is a wage that really people depend on to get along, not just spending money for a high school kid, but families depend on this, and that's why it's so important that we, in the next few weeks, raise the minimum wage, tie the sub-minimum wage, tipped wage to that increase, index it for inflation so we don't have to do this every 3 or 4 years just to keep up with inflation. I yield the floor to the senator from Illinois.
The Assistant Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I would like to join my colleagues and people all across the world in expressing my condolences to the people of South Africa on the passing of their great leader, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela ended his extraordinary autobiography entitled Long Walk to Freedom with these words, and I quote him, "I have walked that long road to freedom. I've tried not to falter. I've made missteps along the way. But I've discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I've taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I've come. But I can rest only for a moment, for with freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not yet ended." Sadly, President Nelson Mandela's long walk and his noble life are indeed now ended. But his influence on the world will endure for a long time to come. The editorial cartoonist for the Washington Post put it, Nelson Mandela was, quote, larger than life and death. Through enormous strength of character and a determination unlike many people in this world, Nelson Mandela helped his beloved South Africa to end the vicious system of apartheid and begin a new walk toward multiracial democracy. His dream, he often said, was that South Africa would become a rainbow nation at peace with itself and with the world. Nelson Mandela astonished the world with his capacity to forgive, even to forgive those who jailed him and persecuted his family. There was an interview on television that I saw yesterday morning on ABC in which Nelson Mandela spoke about his imprisonment shortly after he'd been released. He'd spent 27 years in prison, part of it on Robben Island, which I've had the opportunity to visit, to actually stand in Nelson Mandela's tiny cell. It is an island off of Cape Town. The waters around it are shark-infested so that prisoners won't try to escape from that island. They can just barely make out the land mass away from that island, but they are separated on this piece of land in the middle of this ocean. And there he lived for almost 25 years. There he lived in this cell, many times in isolation. He labored in a quarry nearby, which we visited, and the sunlight bouncing off of the rocks in that quarry virtually blinded him for the rest of his life. He wore sunglasses and begged the photographers not to use flash bulbs the rest of his life because of the damage that had been done to his eyes. The prisoners in Robben Island, many of them sharing his political philosophy in opposing apartheid, tried to create what they called a university atmosphere where they taught one another all that they could remember and all that they knew. They devoured information from the outside world in an effort to try to keep in touch with what was going on. In this interview, as he was released from this imprisonment, Nelson Mandela was asked by the interviewer about his warden and his guard at the prison. He talked about the deep emotional ties they developed, how this guard that he came to know, I believe his name was Gregory, was a real gentleman, in the words of Nelson Mandela, and how when Mandela was finally released, there was a moment of emotion as they knew that they would part after all these years of such a close relationship. I recall that story because so many times when I've given commencement addresses, I've used as an example Nelson Mandela's decision when elected president of South Africa to invite that guard from his prison to be there as one of his honored guests at his inauguration as president of South Africa. That to me speaks volumes. Nelson Mandela taught us powerful lessons about justice, tolerance, and reconciliation. As the first democratically elected president of South Africa, Mandela was the father of a new nation. Like George Washington, the father of our nation, he chose consciously, deliberately, to walk away from power. In doing so, he reminded us that peaceful, orderly transition of power is one of the hallmarks of a real democracy. The prestigious Ibrahim Prize for Achievement in African Leadership was created in 2007 to recognize African leaders who served their people by voluntarily stepping down from power, as President Mandela did. Sadly, this year, for the second year in a row, the award committee couldn't identify one African leader who met that standard. Leaders in neighboring Zimbabwe, as well in Syria, Egypt, Venezuela, Cuba, and so many other nations, torn by conflict and manipulated division, would do well to ponder this measure of Nelson Mandela's greatness. Mr. President, one of the great honors of my life was meeting President Mandela when he came to Washington in September 1998, near the end of his presidency, to receive the Congressional Gold Medal. This Congressional Gold Medal is the highest honor that this Congress can bestow on a civilian. President Mandela noted that he was humbled to be the first African to ever receive it. In his brief remarks at the gold medal ceremony, President Mandela thanked the American people and Congress for our help in bringing an end to the odious system of apartheid through congressionally imposed economic sanctions and other measures. These are Nelson Mandela's words. If today the people of South Africa are free at last to address their basic needs, if the countries of Southern Africa have the opportunity to realize the potential for development through cooperation, if Africa can devote all her energies and resources to her reconstruction, then it is not least because the American people identified with and lent their support to the struggle to end apartheid, including critically through action by this Congress. Mr. President, I remember that battle. I remember that debate. I was brand new to the U.S. House of Representatives, just a few years in service. And the debate came up as to whether the United States would continue to impose sanctions on the apartheid racist government of South Africa. I was a member of the House of Representatives at that time, and I sat on the floor convinced that we should do so and listen to the critics of that policy. Many of them came to the floor and said things which I couldn't believe. They characterized Nelson Mandela as nothing more than a communist who should never be trusted to lead that country. I thought to myself, he might have had a flirtation with communism at some point in his life, but this man is speaking to basic principles that are consistent with America's values and principles. You know, I found it interesting last week, after Nelson Mandela died, to read the editorial in the Wall Street Journal about Nelson Mandela. I commend it to people to understand where that thinking came from that believed the United States should not be involved in trying to strike down the apartheid form of government. If you'll read that editorial about Nelson Mandela's death, you will find the following names mentioned: Karl Marx, Lenin, and I'm trying to recall who else was, I think Che Guevara was mentioned as well, and communism. Stalin was mentioned in there. In just a few sentences about Nelson Mandela, the Wall Street Journal editors decided to put all those names in there as touchstones and reference points to his life. It's an indication how people can get it just plain wrong, even at the highest levels of journalism in the United States, as they did in the debate in Congress. We passed the sanctions legislation. I believe the year was 1985 or 1986. We sent it to President Reagan. He vetoed it. We overrode President Reagan's veto so that the sanctions went forward to condemn apartheid and do what we could to change it in South Africa 30 years ago. I can recall that because a congressman at the time, Howard Wolpe of Michigan, was the chairman of the Africa subcommittee. He came to me one day as a new member of the House and he said, "I'd like to do a congressional delegation trip to Africa. Would you like to go?" And I said, I would be honored. I've never been there and I'd like to go. Well, we put our itinerary together. It included South Africa, and then when we applied for visas, it turned out that that apartheid government denied visas to all the members of Congress who had voted for sanctions, which included Chairman Volpe and myself. So the trip never took place. It took several years and a change in government, the arrival of Nelson Mandela, to see a welcoming South Africa and visas issued to members of Congress who wished to visit. President Mandela asked the American Congress and the people to continue to walk with the people of South Africa to help them develop their economy and strengthen their democracy. Mr. President, as I've said, I traveled to countries in Africa. I've seen the progress that can occur when governments are accountable to their people and really serve democracy. This Congress can pay a truly fitting tribute to President Mandela's life by heeding the request he made to us to help Africa, to help South Africa, strengthen their economies in ways that will benefit not only that continent, but the United States of America. I mentioned earlier about the parallels between President Washington and President Mandela. Nelson Mandela was also his nation's Abraham Lincoln. I do not exaggerate. I'll close with a story. We all know the words from President Lincoln's majestic second inaugural address, which took place right outside those doors. It was in 1865. And as he looked forward to the end of the Civil War, he turned to this war-torn nation that had lost so many in this battle that had gone on for years, and he said, quote, "With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are on." A friend would later note that Lincoln's features when he gave that address were haggard with care, tempest-tossed and weather-beaten. But with the nightmare of the Civil War almost over, Washington, D.C. was just poised for a joyous celebration of victory. For the first time, African-American troops marched down the streets in the inaugural parade after President Lincoln gave that address, and blacks mingled with the inaugural crowd right outside here on the Capitol lawn. It was a rainy, overcast day when Lincoln gave his second inaugural address. But a friend of his noted, quote, "Just as President Lincoln stepped forward to take the oath of office, the sun, which had been obscured by rain clouds, burst forth in splendor." President Lincoln saw it. The next day, the president asked a friend, "Did you notice that sunburst? It made my heart jump." Well, the skies were also overcast the day that Nelson Mandela received the Congressional Gold Medal here in Washington. On that day, the dark bronze bust of Martin Luther King, Jr. had been moved from one side of the rotunda so that Lincoln and Dr. Martin Luther King appeared to preside together over this ceremony awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to Nelson Mandela. As President Mandela started to speak, rays of sunlight began to pour into the rotunda. They illuminated the base of the statues first and then rose gradually until by the time President Mandela finished speaking, both Lincoln and King were bathed in bright sunlight. With a little imagination, you could almost hear Lincoln say, "Did you notice that sunburst? It made my heart jump." Like Lincoln, President Mandela now belongs to the ages. And while our hearts are heavy today with President Mandela's passing, the world can take inspiration from the lessons he taught us while he walked among us. Mr. President, I ask consent that the following remarks be placed as a separate part in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we mourn the passing of Nelson Mandela, a great noble leader who changed history, we also take a moment to recall other leaders closer